The recent emphasis that the Crowther Lab has been doing, sort of looking at things at the global scale, came about from a few papers that really focused on, first off, the number of trees across the globe, and then looking at areas where you can restore trees and sort of the maximum potential of tree restoration. And increasingly, people came to the lab and wanted specific advice about what types of trees they should plant, or maybe how do they maximize carbon capture in a restoration project, or how do they maximize the robustness of this community to disturbance or land use change. And increasingly, we realize that there's tons of questions that maybe we're not focusing on as scientists, but that are really critical to restoration and conservation organizations. And so a lot of the work that the Crowther Lab as a whole has been moving towards is trying to figure out how we can address these questions that serve a scientific goal and really help these restoration and conservation groups as well.
Well, I think science usually helps us to see things that when we just look at nature, don't see, because there is so much noise, and it's hard to tell the causes for the patterns that we see. And science can help us to remove this noise and then see the causes for the patterns. We need restoration projects because they are on the ground. They know what they see. They really can tell us. If we give them scientific information how to maybe better restore, they can test these things and see if they actually work or not. And I think science is usually just an approximation of the reality, and restoration organizations and the projects, they exactly know what happens.
As we all know, society is facing these critical challenges of global climate change, land conversion, ecosystem disturbances, and restoration and conservation groups are really at the forefront of this problem. They're the ones who are really charged with translating scientific knowledge and public policy into action on the ground. And in order to do this effectively and responsibly, they're really asking scientists for this information that they critically need to make responsible and effective restoration and conservation decisions.
This was the first project I did in the Crowther Lab. It was kind of a semester project that evolved into a year or even longer project because it was really interesting. So what we were interested in is, for every place on the globe, we wanted to know how many tree species in the environment are invasive. And what I did is I had data for a lot of places on the world, and I had information on what kind of species lived there and how many of those were invasive. And then I was able to create a model that tells me what do invasive species kind of like and what makes an environment prone to have a lot of invasive species. And then I use this model to predict this for every place on the planet. Yeah, and it's usually like the reason for why it surprised me. We had a lot of invasive species in Europe. It was covered in invasive species, and this was weird because the level of invasive species was just too high. And what we realized is that the data we worked with labeled the species as invasive, but in reality it was naturalized species, so species we planted a couple of 100 years ago in Europe, and now they are naturalized and not even invasive anymore. So it was kind of a historic artifact that we had in the data. The first step, what we did, two teammates created an app that can get for specific sites ecological insights. And this app is so cool because organizations can tell us where they are, what sites they are covering and restoring or conserving, and we get or send them the app, and they get the the newest ecological insights. We got a request from a tribe leader from the Philippines, and they wanted to get more ecological insights about their sacred forests. So with that insights, they are able to communicate to the public how valuable their sacred forest is in terms of carbon sequestering or also biodiversity. So over the last year, we connected with over 200 organizations, and they share their sites, their data. And with that, we hope to connect them with each other and with science, so they can get more information and help how to restore and conserve the ecosystems they're working. It's so cool to see all these people working towards the goal of restoring and conserving ecosystems, because we all depend on them. And it's important that we know how we can live with nature without harming it. Well, it's such a complicated thing, because if you think about nature, there are so many connections, so many factors playing with each other and interacting with each other, so it's hard for us to just easily tell how we can restore these ecosystems and make them strong to withstand difficulties. For restoration organizations themselves, often it already starts in what should they measure, how can they show that they're successful in restoring sites, and how to even report these successes. Then it starts with how to monitor success, because this is so costly in time and money. So they have to go out to the field, measure each tree, and usually it's quite a big area, and this takes a lot of time, a lot of people, and this is something that we are trying to help them assist. So what I did the last half year, I created kind of visual monitoring tools, so they show how the site evolved over the past years. And we can show the success. We can show, for example, also how much water is in the area, where and how this changes. And this can sometimes lead to information on if there will be drought or not. And this can help organizations act in advance to support the restoration. So I think global map, they can show a global perspective. So they can show how everything is connected with each other, and then that even if you look at one site, your site is within another bigger area, and everything on our planet is connected. And even though we are working on smaller sites, if we look at the bigger picture and see how other organizations are successful, or if they fail, why do they fail, we can exchange information, knowledge and experiences, and this is the way how we can all together then improve restoration and conservation.
So I sort of, in some ways, inherited this project from a different research group at ETH, the landscape ecology group led by Loïc Pellissier. They have been working on SDMs, so species distribution modeling, for a long time, and have had a lot of work on this specific model that was actually developed not specifically for plants. They've also, one of the big projects that was done with this was actually modeling the where different fish species are distributed in the sea. So a completely different application, but basically I worked with them to adapt their code to work in Earth Engine, in Google Earth Engine, so that we could upscale it much more, so we could model, currently we have 4,000 species, tree species. We're working on modeling 2,500 more plant species. They're more in the herbaceous or grasses and shrubs. And so the work where I came in was really making this code more efficient and to run on Google Earth Engine, which uses the Google servers, so we could run it many, many times.